Part 7. =RK equals. Nebula, Republic Diplomatic Transport, Consular Class. Hyperspace, en route to Argao. Raging emotions ensured that Padme couldn't concentrate on the task at hand, reviewing everything she knew of the people in power on Argao and those most able to influence them. She was elated and horrified at the news slowly coming from Naboo and the Mid-Rim alliance her world was entangled with. The relief Padme felt when Vale restored communication lines with her home world and the contact with her government that followed quickly gave way to sheer incredulity and rage, soon followed by horror and sadness. The senator knew that it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to say that the Naboo she knew and loved was largely gone. All the attacks and fighting her home suffered since the war began, especially after Blue Shadow, might have broken something within her people. There was no other way for Padme to explain all the news and marching orders she got from the Queen and her government. It should have been a relief, really. What had happened obviously meant that Padme wasn't unique in choosing pragmatism and the future of her people over her ideals in a desperate bid to protect Naboo. Now, it was painfully clear that her Queen, government, and, most importantly, people were willingly walking the same dark path she had trodden first. That wasn't a source of relief like one might expect, it was anything but. Instead, everything Padme did after she lost contact with Naboo all those months ago now tasted like ash. Padme toyed with a data pad holding messages and news from home, struggling to make sense of her emotions. Nearby, Anakin stopped his irritating pacing and finally sat in a nearby chair. He looked at her with a frown. "I hoped that contact with Naboo would make you happier and keep you that way," Anakin offered. "It should have. It did, then it didn't." Padme put down the data pad, resisting the urge to throw it at one of the walls. "I don't know." Anakin grimaced at that. As much as she loved him, Padme knew he wasn't great at dealing with feelings, especially those of others. It didn't help that, in this case, she couldn't make heads or tails of her own emotions. "Tell me about it," he asked. At least, ever since their secret came out, while the whole galaxy went mad while simultaneously being on fire, Anakin was trying to be a good husband. That one used to be very hard with the war going on and the need to hide from virtually everyone. "Naboo is still there. I should be happy about it. I should be happy that my actions didn't make me an outcast." Padme frowned at herself at the whine evident in her voice. She didn't whine. "Padme, did you want to be punished or something?" Anakin asked, clearly incredulous at her words. "How did you conclude from what I just said?" Padme demanded. "From the way you said it and the odd mix of emotions that you blasted me with while you said it," Anakin reasonably explained. Padme opened her mouth to retort before clamping it shut. That surely couldn't be right. She didn't want to be vindicated. Did she want to be wrong about what she had been doing for months? "Padme, you are beginning to worry me here. Talk to me, please." Anakin looked at her with a puppy-like eye. "I don't know." She huffed. "Why is my government backing me and Vale to the hilt? They should have been angry at what I've been up to, even if they accepted my actions as necessary. We can always blame the Separatists and the Sith," Anakin offered. "You mean Vale? When something happens as of late, we can happily hold him responsible one way or another. You can't tell me he isn't involved in all this. We know he is." Anakin made an all-encompassing gesture for emphasis. "That's not making me feel better," Padme concluded. "I don't think anyone sane could be feeling much better until this damned war is over," Anakin pointed out. "It's true, isn't it? What you just said." Padme closed her eyes and slumped in her seat. "This war will keep breaking and twisting everyone and everything until it is over for good. All we could do is our best to see it over sooner rather than later." Padme slowly nodded. Anakin was right about that. =RK equals. Bank of Argao Arcology, Argao. Toog system, contested space. Only the nebula could come anywhere near the planet, much less land. Her escorts remained on the system's edge, under the watchful eye of warships loyal to Argao and its allies across the sector. The mere fact that such an important system went rogue months ago, dragging its whole sector with it, was a sign of the times. Its location so close to Coruscant and many vital, still intact industrial centers meant that the hyperplanes leading to this region of space had to be constantly covered by Republic naval elements, creating yet another bleeding wound that stretched the military thinner and thinner. Padmé's job was to resolve the issue through diplomacy because the price for doing so through military might would be too heavy in lives and material, not to mention the potentially disastrous diplomatic consequences. To make the situation even murkier, Argau's authorities did have a legal justification for what they were doing, even if under different circumstances, they would be hard-pressed to justify what was practically secession and armed neutrality. As if all that wasn't bad enough, the official and primary reason Padmé was here was to negotiate with the Bank of Argau as an influential member of the banking clans that remained loyal and friendly to the Republic. At least Anakin's presence and their conversation made Padmé feel a bit better before they arrived in the system. They pointedly landed on a large landing pad that still showed clear signs of combat. This was one of the locations where the locals fought the clones deployed to keep the system and planet safe from the Confederacy. In the process, those Republic troops broke one of the 3 most essential laws on Argau. Padmé shouldn't have been surprised that Argau only acted once the leaders here believed the Republic was on its deathbed. That belief was behind the key reason she was here, ready to negotiate with people who betrayed the Republic in its hour of need. Otherwise, the so-called Emergency Council wouldn't exist, and Argau and its sector would still be a part of the Republic. The reception committee was meant to make a point that Padmé couldn't miss. 2 large blocks of soldiers in impressive-looking gear waited for her, flanking a representative of the Emergency Council running affairs in the sector. There wasn't even a high-ranking representative ready to meet the Republic delegation, merely a local bureaucrat. When all was said and done, the locals were towing a fine line between making a statement, demonstrating power, and leveling a not-so-thinly veiled insult at the Republic. Once upon a time, Padmé would have despaired the string of disasters that led to this state of affairs. In that regard, repeated shocks to the systems had a numbing effect, as she found out months ago. Padmé schooled her face into an expression of polite interest as she examined their hosts. She knew she hadn't fully gotten to grips with her emotions. It was just that she could no longer muster the capacity to care. After all, it was countless selfish, small-minded, arrogant fools who brought the galaxy to its knees and ensured it would burn in a war like no other. That was the same kind of smug, grasping fools she would have to negotiate with in the foreseeable future. Anakin looked warily at Padmé while she felt an uncharacteristic sense of vicious vindication grasp her heart. If she had to walk this path they were all damned to endure, she could at least do it to the best of her ability and damn everyone who would endanger her people. =RK=, Part 8. =RK=. In the wake of Operation Star Hammer, Governor Gideon Tarkin of Iriadu is conducting a series of state visits across the core. This is the latest controversial move to come from the infamous Mid-Rim Alliance. Holonet News. What is the difference between this so-called Mid-Rim Alliance and the separatists we fight? Are they any better than all the traitors who broke away from the Republic after Chancellor Palpatine's assassination? They should return to the fold while they still can. From a discussion on the Holonet Core Politics forums. During a private ceremony today, Admiral Joanna Holt from Corellia received the Holt Cross for her service in the war to date. The highly decorated Admiral will enjoy a brief recovery period after participating in intense battles before the Separatist Grand Offensive and before returning to active duty. Corellian Daily News. Governor Tarkin will conclude his tour of the Corps with a visit to Anaxes later this week. GNN. =RK=. Serpar Hills, Poles Anaxes. Anaxes, Axum System. Gideon Tarkin arguably arrived at one of the most important meetings of his tour in the back of a quiet limousine, the only kind of vehicle allowed to move above the ground across the Serpar Hills. This area surrounding Anaxes' capital was as much a natural preserve as a retreat to the wealthiest and most powerful families on the planet. More importantly, This was one of the few places in the galaxy where members of the most generational families who served the Galactic Republic's military and judicial forces for thousands of years had residences here. Those varied from vast ancient family mansions to small villas for those houses that weren't native to the planet. Being granted the ability to purchase even the smallest residence upon these hills was a privilege earned not with mere wealth but through centuries of storied and faithful services. Despite their long-standing efforts and service, the Tarkin family would have to keep proving themselves for a few more centuries to become part of the exclusive club he would be meeting tonight. The mere fact he was here was an incredible achievement, tarnished by a singular fact: it was the sign of the sorry state of the galaxy in general and the Republic in particular. If anything, Wilhuf should have been here in his stead. Nevertheless, he was grateful for the invitation and the unique opportunity it represented in these turbulent times. By the time Tarkin arrived, many of the gathering participants were already in the back of House Ch's mansion, enjoying cool drinks in the shade within a lush garden. While the place had various open areas where hundreds of people could quickly gather, it also offered many secluded nooks perfect for private conversations. Familiar faces and crests of famous houses confirmed the importance of this outing for Gideon. From the sight of it, every military family of note serving the Republic had representatives already here. By the look of it, there were still many guests to arrive before they could truly begin. Gideon shook hands, made introductions, and greeted people he had already worked with during the war and in the long years of anti-piracy operations Iriadai was involved with before the current chaos unfolded. Coburns, Talons, Holtz, Helors, and Taggis were merely a few famous houses with key members present and ready to represent them. Initially, Gideon had to answer various leading questions, which were obviously aimed at judging his political inclinations. It wasn't hard to figure out that practically everyone present was poisoned by all the ceaseless politics in the core that strangled the war effort. The people here should know, these families had cadet branches and scions all over the core. That meant they could influence and gain information on the actions of various local governments, which didn't cover themselves in glory during the ongoing conflict. What took Gideon aback was that no one bothered to hide their disdain at the political situation. The people here, who were for all intents and purposes the backbone of the Republic military due to their presence on all levels of its officer corps, were all venting their spleen at what was happening across the corps, blaming it on short-sighted politicians. The opportunity and the scope of danger here couldn't be understated. Wilhuf might not have been here, however. Vale's other crony, Joanna Holt, arrived with little fanfare. So this was the kind of mandatory vacation she had to take to recover from all the insanity working with the Sith entailed. It dawned on Gideon that his brother and his Sith accomplice had a hand in him being here. In that regard, he suddenly viewed his unexpected invitation to this get-together with sudden apprehension. What were those two up to now? Governor Tarkin, someone proclaimed in a deep baritone. Gideon looked to his right to see one of the young scions of House Tag from the branches of the family who remained loyal to the Republic. The only reason Gideon was familiar with the man was the scandal surrounding the Tag's main branch, who joined the Separatists, which drowned their house in infamy while making those who remained loyal that much more notable. Brace Tag was a tall, broad-chested young man with a crop of blonde hair in a short military cut. "I am glad you could make it." The man's voice boomed through the small alcove Tarkin was standing under. "Our host would like to speak with you, Governor." "Lead the way, Mr. Tag," Gideon nodded at the youngster, who appeared to be in his last year of academy training. His presence here was notable. Many young officers would soon be on the front, and at least some of them should have been busy studying and training at the nearby military academies. On the way to meet the leaders of House Treshik, Tag introduced Gideon to the up-and-coming scion of House Mekti from Toponi Space, one Octavian Grant. Despite his youth, he was de facto in charge of the Toponi sector's naval forces, a position Grant had achieved both due to his high birth and competence as a naval tactician. Like Gideon, he was among the few odd people sticking out in such a gathering. Despite their rank or history of service or even ancient noble titles, they weren't counted among the generationals. Tag led him to a large wooden table carved from the stump of what used to be an immense tree. "Governor Tarkin, Let me introduce you to the Honorable Lord Gregory Ch and his son, Commander Oswald Ch. Tag did as he had been obviously instructed before making himself scarce. Father and son could have been mirror copies of each other save for the scars and cybernetic implants marring the side of the scion's face. Governor, the Ch patriarch greeted jovially. We've been watching your people's exploits as of late with keen interest. You've made your house and people proud. I am honored at the high prize, Lord Ch. Gideon offered a small, appropriate bow. I won't waste your time with empty platitudes, Governor. Such games of words and empty promises got us all here in the first place. That was undoubtedly blunt and to the point. Generally, it wasn't how any political operator of Ch's ability and position got things done. This, combined with everything else Gideon heard and suspected that evening, made him once again re-evaluate the importance of this gathering. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Lord Ch, was all Gideon said, leaving his host to make the first move. Among our friends and allies here, we have families who served the Republic from its inception all those millennia ago. Most of us have been proud to serve it for thousands of years. Ch's grey eyebrows locked into a thin line as he glowered, only for the Senate and the politicians behind it to throw it all away in less than a century. The Republic we were so proud to serve and protect is no more, a finality in the Lord's voice sent shivers down Gideon's spine. What could happen here tonight would be either highly beneficial to Ariadu and the Mid-Rim Alliance or an utter and unmitigated disaster. The last straw for many of us here on Anaxes was when the Volunteer Corps under Colonel Tano had to engage the Republic's own clone troopers on Coruscant itself because the Senate is beyond useless, Oswald Ch interjected. That mess had been something else, only rivaled by the utter disaster in the Corellian system. In part, news of those events helped key people within the Alliance make up their minds about supporting Vale's mad gambits as of late because they highlighted a simple truth Gideon's host was painfully aware of: the Republic utterly failed during this war. That was also one of the many reasons why Gideon backed his brother to the hilt with the Mid-Rim Alliance project. That was bad enough. This last successful offensive was the last chance to save the Republic, Gregory stated, and couldn't entirely hide the pain in his voice. Instead of our esteemed political leaders doing their best to take advantage of this success, they betrayed us and the very ideals of the Republic yet again, ensuring it is dead and would stay dead. Gideon merely raised an inquiring eyebrow at that. You know what I am talking about, Governor. Otherwise, General Vale wouldn't have had to come to your people to beg for aid to liberate Mandalore. He would have had all the assets needed to push the enemy as far back as logistics allow, buying us all more breathing space and time. You are aware of the true reasons behind my state visits, Gideon nodded, not really surprised. His meetings made one thing abundantly clear: many of those determined to continue fighting the war had a particular outcome in mind for the state of the galaxy when the shooting was over. That galaxy would ideally not have things like a relevant Mandalorian state or a Mid-Rim Alliance as anything but a footnote in the history books. Of course, people didn't outright say so to his face. However, there was no other way to interpret their actions and inaction. This little gathering has a singular purpose. We are to decide on a course of action and act as one to see it through, Lord Ch explained. That is quite ambitious, my lord, Gideon spoke blandly while his mind raced. If the Generationals could act with a unified voice, they could exert tremendous political pressure across many important governments all over the core and beyond. It was becoming exceedingly clear that there was more of a rift between the military and political establishments busy fighting the war than anyone suspected. Otherwise, Gideon wouldn't have this conversation, which was borderline treason. What do you intend to do, my lord? Gideon asked warily. I will have a few answers from you, Governor. Then we will see. Part 1 =RK=. Rumors of various Republic members curtailing military support despite the overwhelming success of Operation Starhammer have been confirmed. Official statements from fewer than 100 governments cite the heavy casualties their system defense navies suffered during the recent offensive. while they pledged continued future support that could only happen after their navies had been rebuilt and upgraded with modern military technology. Contrary to those official statements, sources who wish to remain anonymous claim that the real reason for withdrawing military support is the belief that General Vail intentionally sacrificed SDF units to preserve elements of the Republic Navy. Holonet News. GAR High Command issued a statement that recent events in the Corps mean the Republic military won't be able to launch any new major offensive actions. We should prepare for a war that might continue for years, dashing all hopes that recent successes have turned the tide and might have heralded a rapid conclusion of hostilities. GNN. An increasing number of serving and retired military officers all over the Republic are voicing support for Chancellor Kenobi's administration and the New Order platform it is backing. GNN. The closed-doors meeting between Senator Skywalker of Naboo and the Emergency Council on Argao would enter history as the first time a high-ranked Republic official, a loyalist senator no less, openly admitted that the Republic had fallen. While the details of that meeting would largely remain classified for at least a generation, it marks a turning point in history. From then on, preparations for establishing the new order and proclaiming the future empire would significantly accelerate. The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Republic, Volume 10, Holonet Archive Service =RK=, Bank of Argao Archaeology, Argao, Tube System. 2 groups of soldiers escorted Padme and Anakin to a large conference room, leading them through corridors and elevators void of bystanders. Instead of local diplomats and government representatives, everyone waiting for them flanking Zebulon may appeared to be wealthy CEOs. A brief round of stiff introduction confirmed that Padme wasn't off the mark as far as her hosts were concerned, which did nothing to improve her mood. Padme concluded that encapsulated much of what was wrong with the Republic and was a major reason for its ongoing ruination. And to think she used to believe that democracy and the rule of law reigned supreme in the cradle of civilization that was the core. Senator Skywalker, we have a long list of grievances with the Republic. May began as soon as the introductions were over. After the arrogant conduct of your government and military, we would require compensation to even consider normalization of relations. If we are to ever continue backing you in your war against the Confederacy, we would require much more. I see. Padme humored him while her mind went over her options. What kind of concessions do you have in mind? We have prepared a list with tax breaks and exemptions for you to review, Senator. However, we must first agree on the penalties the Republic needs to pay for grossly violating our sovereignty and highest laws. May kept going undeterred. Padme had to grant him that much, he wasn't thinking small. Behind her, she could feel Anakin stiffen at the disrespect and demands. Her husband was quite angry already, and she was sure he would be angrier still by the time they heard all May had in mind. May kept citing many violations and damages caused by the GAR units stationed on the planet when the locals went after them. In that regard, Padme honestly wasn't entirely unsympathetic. The Republic military deploying to Argao in the way it had been heavy-handed and short-sighted at best, outright belligerent and asking for trouble at worst. That still didn't excuse the locals for attacking like they did, especially when they did it. There was not even a shadow of a doubt in Padme's mind that the only reason they dared do it was the perceived weakness of the Republic. It didn't help that said weakness was very much true and caused by the kind of people who smugly looked down on her in this meeting and issued demands that would undoubtedly make them wealthier at the expense of everyone else, the regular citizens of this world, and the whole sector included. Padme thought about her many talks about politics with Anakin, especially about what she used to think was his naive demand that when push came to shove, someone had to make politicians sit down and go on with the program. She used to believe that her dear husband had been merely naive about politics and blind to the danger of consolidating the kind of power that would make governments do as a higher authority told them. As of late, circumstances had forced Padme to re-evaluate her thoughts on the matter. The dangers she spoke of were genuine, that didn't change. What changed was the belief that there were enough good people in power who could be reasonably expected to do what was best for those they represented and the galaxy as a whole. Everything that happened since Palpatine's assassination proved the senator wrong on that point. Today was no different, and suddenly, Padme found herself at the end of her rope. She had been struggling to do the right thing in a galaxy she could scarcely recognize for a long time. Yet, what was morally right and what was best for her people was seldom the same thing. Something had to give, and it wasn't the grim reality of their situation. You are right, Director May. The Republic should have handled Argao in a different manner. There is no excuse for the stark violations of your sovereignty and laws, Padme allowed. We can't change the past and must accept the facts as they are. For all intents and purposes, the Republic that intentionally and foolishly broke one of your 3 highest principles is no more. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, listening to your demands. Padme raised a hand when May opened his mouth to say something. I haven't finished, Director, she added in a frosty tone. If you believed the Republic had a future, you wouldn't have acted as you did. However, there is a simple fact that you seem to have missed, Director. Padme's words came out harsher and colder than she intended them to be. That was in no small part because what she was saying aloud was an admission she had been struggling to avoid for a long time. Being forced to confront the particular truth here and now was painful and infuriating. It meant that almost everything she had been doing for over a decade was an outright failure. Her principled stands for democracy were nearly pointless gestures when compared to cold and uncaring reality. Further, what Padme really wanted to do was to scream and vent at the short-sighted fools arrayed against her for their stupid games, which brought down the light of civilization that shone for countless years. These people she was supposed to negotiate with in good faith were the enemy as much if not more, than the separatists. The Confederacy was at least more or less open about what it stood for and wanted to achieve. And what is that fact we overlooked, Senator Skywalker? May demanded in a condescending tone. Those words focused on Padme's raging mind, and she realized she had abruptly stopped talking. The Republic might be dead now. You and many other vultures are eager to pick up at its carcass. It doesn't matter. The war is not over, Director May. Chancellor Kenobi's government was established to keep fighting the war in spite of what happened to the Republic, and it will keep fighting it. Those who back our current government are in for the long haul, and like General Vale just demonstrated, it is a war we can win. The question you should be asking yourself, Director, is where you would be when the dust settles and we busy ourselves putting the galaxy back into order. Padme was glad she avoided outright threat, considering her turbulent state of mind. RK equals Part 2 RK equals 21st Independent Ranger Regiment returns victorious after participating in the liberation of Corellia. Tactics and Strategy Magazine. Upon returning home, Colonel Ahsoka Tano and her regiment will receive the highest honors of the Anaxes government and military. Anaxes Daily News. The CEO of Core Duro Shipping, Hani Trialal, spearheaded a clandestine meeting between Duro's colonial leaders, corporate CEOs, and the Corellian diktat in the ruins of Coronet City on Corellia. News about what was discussed and any agreements that might have been reached are currently scarce. Holonet News. Operation Star Hammer was the war's turning point, both politically and militarily. That was the Republic's last chance to redeem itself and rise to the challenge. To an outside observer and for the regular citizens, by its very nature, that offensive was an incredible display of unity and determination unseen since before Chancellor Palpatine's murder. Indeed, if the Republic was as united as it appeared, the war would have been 1 month ago, and the core wouldn't have been invaded and, in part, captured by the Confederacy. The history as we know it would have been radically different. Unfortunately, the Republic was far from as united as it seemed at the time. Any hopes for more military triumphs and a rapid conclusion of the war died shortly after Star Hammer's conclusion when many core worlds pulled back their system defense forces' contribution to the GAR, citing various reasons. The same was true for certain ground formations released to join the GAR for Star Hammer and the liberation of the core. The Republic's political leadership utterly failed in what should have been both its finest hour and that of greatest need. It rapidly became clear to anyone paying attention that the old order had utterly failed. Thus, people began looking for alternatives. In those days, the only ones who were offering something new, compared to a return to a failed status quo, were Chancellor Kenobi and those allied to her promoting the New Order agenda. Starhammer became a catalyst for change. Before it, the support the Kenobi administration enjoyed was shaky at best. It was concentrated among those who wanted to keep fighting the war. Yet, there was no united vision about what survival would look like, much less a victory. The success of Starhammer became a catalyst for change, which led to a rift between large parts of the military within the Corps in particular and the surviving Republic at large, on one side, and the political leadership not aligned with the Kenobi administration. At the same time, a broad political divide and realignment fermented between the core worlds invaded by the Confederacy and those that remained intact. The Fall of the Galactic Republic by Lilian Solo, 1st edition, Corellia. == Coronet City, Corellia. Obi-Wan shouldn't have been back on Corellia, dealing with politics. Instead, he should be in orbit or on the planet's side as one of the other 5 brothers, coordinating and commanding the liberation campaigns there. However, in this damned war, no one was getting what they wanted or, more importantly, needed. This brief respite from the direct war effort could have been spent speaking with Ahsoka and trying to keep her away from the worst effects of her slip into the dark side. Obi-Wan still didn't know how she managed not to fall for good and somehow avoided becoming a monster. He had his suspicions, and they all began and ended with Vale. That constant source of headaches proved that the Jedi didn't know as much about the Force in general and the dark side in particular as they believed they did. At least this time, the consequences weren't catastrophic. In that regard, the best Kenobi could do in the short term was to ensure that Ahsoka and her unit had time to rest and recover at Anaxes. Ideally, he or another Jedi would find the time and capacity to aid her in recovering her balance. More representatives arrived, bringing Obi-Wan out of his musings. He looked around and examined the area through the Force. Fortunately, there was no sense of imminent danger. However, he couldn't say that the ruined building they met at was as safe as the gathering of so many high-profile people might require. They were in a vast, somewhat intact auditorium within the Corps headquarters, a place that saw heavy fighting before the Corellians had to abandon it along with this part of the capital. Kenobi was sure this was why the sneaky CEO who arranged the meeting chose that place. It was a very pointed reminder of the reality of their situation and the price the war was extracting from everyone. Most, but certainly not all, of the attendees were Durs. A handful were CEOs of major corporations who were out of the Duro system when it fell. The rest of the corporate officers were either the highest-ranked people left holding the bag after the separatist Grand Offensive. Government leaders from Durs colonies were spread in small clusters, surrounded by diplomats and military advisors. Finally, the diktat arrived, leading a Corellian political, economic, and military delegation. That got the nervous and often excited chatter to die out. Their host nodded politely at the Corellians and headed for the podium, which was mostly clear of debris. However, the wall and screens behind it was still a shot-up ruin. "I am glad you all chose to attend this meeting," Hani Trial said in perfect, if slightly accented, basic. "I see among you friends, allies, rivals, and people who, until recently, were political and economic enemies. The reality of this war makes our grievances pale compared to what is happening across the galaxy as we speak." Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered people. Obi-Wan could sense curiosity mixed with resignation and anticipation. "I hope you've all done what I requested before arriving here," Taral continued. This time, the emotions rippling through the crowd were vastly more varied and harder to pinpoint. What stood out to Obi-Wan was a lot of anger, deep resignation, and immense frustration mixed with a sliver of hope. The Durs CEO waited for a few more heartbeats, carefully studying everyone with her large eyes. Her dark blue skin looked almost grey in the hastily repaired lighting of the chamber. "We are at a crossroads," Taral waved at the crowd. "Not just us here, but everyone in the Republic and beyond. Until the campaign that led to the liberation of this very world, the Republic was about to die. The latest victories our people paid in for blood should have revitalized the Republic. Instead, all you need to know the truth is to take a look at the news, the Doro sneered. Each of us has contacts offering us a deeper understanding of the situation. You should know it is worse than what the Holonet is babbling about. Angry murmurs of agreement carried throughout the chamber. The Republic failed us. It failed everyone, including the damned separatists who are murdering our people and destroying our livelihoods. It failed Corellia, and countless innocent people paid the price. It failed Doro, and each world across the galaxy suffering under the separatists. Obi-Wan stiffened at those words and very warily observed everyone else. The gathered people were growing angrier by the minute, and there was no hiding their agreement with the sentiment. It didn't help his peace of mind that he was the one representing the Republic in here. Yet, curiously enough, Kenobi couldn't sense danger, even if the Duro woman kept stoking the crowd's anger. You all know what I am talking about. We all participated in the petty games of politics, power, and money that have characterized the Republic for countless generations. Until the enemy was at our gates, we had more important concerns than the war. The same is true for those who aren't under immediate separatist threat across the core. Obi-Wan could clearly see and feel the self-loathing and the immense anger Taral barely had a grip on. At the same time, many people around him burned in outrage, yet more than a few briefly felt shame at the truth thrown in their faces. Many of us here were at the heart of the problem that brought the Republic so low that it might not even exist right now. I say, enough. We all have a monumental choice to make. Will we keep playing games that might further damn us and our people, or can we rise up to the occasion? These past weeks were proof enough for me that the old order is rotten. We let it get so bad because it benefited us, while no one cared about the consequences. Now it is time to pay the price for our blind arrogance. Taral paused and took a few deep breaths while the crowd rumbled before her. I have a series of radical propositions for you. No matter what each of you might decide to do, as the CEO of Corduro, I have chosen a new path for those in my employ. I offer my corporation's full political, economic, and military support to Chancellor Kenobi and the GAR for the war effort. I beseech you that you do the same. Obi-Wan stared at the CEO in shock. He didn't see this one coming, and by the look of it, there weren't many of the gathered people who did. Taral took advantage of the shock caused by her announcement to begin outlining her propositions until the buzz of the crowd became too loud. Kenobi clearly heard ideas of total economic mobilization, raising and equipping vast volunteer corps backed by various financial incentives backed by corporate and government funds. Suggestions for unified rebuilding efforts combined with a massive expansion of the military industry and shipbuilding capacity across the Duro and Corellian sectors followed. By that point, the noise was overwhelming. Part 3 =RK equals Planetary Shield Generator Complex, Mandalore. It was deceptively quiet in the control center. As long as you didn't look at a few large holograms and screens, you might even imagine there wasn't a desperate fight for survival all around the mountains above them. It was pleasantly cool inside, too, which added insult to injury considering the conditions Kal Skaata's warriors had to endure outside. Ever since the enemy committed additional light units to bolster their blockade of the planet, Mandalore's defenders had to fight alone, without resupply by smugglers and enterprising warriors. The lack of news was grating. The last Skaata heard Mandalore was still alive and a menace to the enemy. However, since whatever happened at Bothoi, the separatists ensured no more supplies and news would come in. The latter was terrible for morale. For all they knew, the Mandalorians were fighting alone, left until the enemy mopped up all credible threats. The former was going to get them killed sooner rather than later, likely before morale had a chance to collapse. Skaata left the command center and headed for a nearby meeting room. The crucial members of his government gathered there every few days if no new developments required more frequent meetings. With the enemy content to slowly grind them down while testing new weapons and equipment, there have been few surprises as of late. That left Cal watching the supply counters gradually but inexorably go down, counting the time until it was all over but the dying. The truth was that Scarta needed more assets to do anything but tenaciously defend an ever-shrinking perimeter around the mountain. He needed more warriors, armor, weapons, and at least neutral orbitals to do anything but hold ground for as long as possible. Scarta entered the meeting room to face many painfully familiar faces he would rather not see for a few months. Like usual, the financial minister and his deputy were together, discussing increasingly crazy and unfeasible ideas about buying more time, or even less likely, rebuilding after a potential victory. Across those two sat the Interior Minister Merrick Braller, with Cole Ordo beside him. Their job was to keep a semblance of order in the various shelters. Ordo was particularly busy trying to give young new Mandalorians a foundation that might see them become proper warriors in the future. As a bonus, he could headhunt for people with the right temperament to become Mandalorian protectors, because most of those serving in law enforcement who were fit for front-line duty were either fighting on the front or dead. The general's gaze went over the other important figures in the room, who was in charge of logistics, keeping the planetary and theater shields running, and overseeing less vital tasks. "Report," Scarta ordered and headed for his usual chair. "We have supplies for 2 weeks of intense combat left. We can hold for 5 to 6 months at the current rate." Horus began with the bad news. "If we haven't carefully preserved veteran units with heavy weaponry, the time frame would be lower." That was Scarta's call, and while it worked, it was paid with the blood of countless warriors. If their allies reinforced them, then the Mandalorians could hold. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter. The truth was that if the Separatists came at them like they did shortly after bolstering the blockade and could keep up that kind of pressure, the defensive lines would shatter before they ran out of supplies. Everyone's best bet was that the Separatists were busy resupplying and preparing their droid armies for one last push to end the dream of a restored Mandalorian nation. "We lack the materials and personnel to further expand our manufacturing capacity," Thang Ord added. He was Horus' second in command, and his duties focused on building ground forces equipment. "One of the reasons we might last up to half a year is our limited ability to refurbish and repair damaged equipment of all kinds. Attacks of increased intensity would see us running out of effective weapons to fight with, perhaps even before we burn through our ammo reserves and what we can manufacture here." There was a vast underground lake below them, which served as a source of drinking water, a heatsink for the shield generators, and a source of hydrogen as fuel and gas components of blaster power cells. Their blasters were less effective due to the inferior gas used for power cells. "We're out of most advanced medicine we need," the Interior Minister added. "Our medics used up the last Bacta we had left early this morning. More of our wounded will be dying from now on, and those who recover would need much longer to do so. Between a mountain of rations and hydroponics fed by the lake, food wouldn't be the first critical supply they would run out of." That was partly because everyone who wasn't fighting on the front or expected to make a swift recovery was now stuck on short rations. Scarta heard no new devastating news during the meeting. Everything was going to one of the Corellian hells just like a few days ago, so barring a disaster, nothing required his immediate attention. Once the general was back up to speed, he returned to the control center to oversee the ongoing engagements and try to figure out how to deliver a miracle before they ran out of time. =RK=, Coronet City, Corellia. Before Obi-Wan could retreat to the safety and sanity of a battlefield, the Diktat and Haani trial corralled him for a conversation better held with Satine. "Ladies," Kenobi greeted tiredly. "We have a proposition for you and the Chancellor, General Kenobi," the DAS CEO offered. "We won't waste your time, General, I promise." "I am willing to listen." Obi-Wan's sense of danger was happily making itself known. Sadly, this wasn't the kind of danger he could deal with using his lightsaber. "Duro, like your new home, has been in enemy hands for far too long," Trial pointed out. "We are aware of the political realities holding us back, and that was a major reason for me to arrange for today's little gathering. Vale has been doing the impossible since he made himself known. Personally, I am not going to bet against him liberating Mandalore despite all obstruction. When that happens, we would prefer to be his allies, not friends who did their best to see his people burn. What do you want in exchange? Obi-Wan asked. Unfortunately, he had no illusions left about most people who ran the galaxy, and these two women were no different. In an ideal universe, Corellia would be backing you because of what you did for us and because it is the right thing to do, Shyla Mericope sighed. Corellia entered the war on moral grounds to give credit where credit was due. It also paid a steep price for upholding its principles. At the same time, after what happened, the Republic owed us a debt that simply aiding in our liberation is not enough to erase, the diktat pointed out. Kenobi knew that Corellia might have still fallen if it wasn't for the Jedi coup and Order 66's unforeseen consequences. However, that was a moot point. These events happened, and Republic forces betrayed their Corellian allies. This was the reality they all had to live in and deal with. The Republic as we knew it is dying, General Kenobi. Your wife could only prolong its fall but not reverse it. The Chancellor simply lacks the support and unity required, the CEO reminded him. Obi-Wan wanted to scream at these women. He was sworn to protect the Republic as a Jedi and the supreme commander of its military. This was a step beyond what was discussed during the meeting, which had just ended. What they were speaking of now could be considered treason, the kind he was already deeply involved with already. Kenobi wanted to scream and rage at himself for betraying what he used to stand for, while cursing the galaxy as a whole and the Force for allowing the ongoing insanity to continue. We will be right there beside you, Vale, and his new allies when you build the new order, General Kenobi. We will build it together, for all of us, Corellia, Duro, our friends, and allies. With those words, Shyla Mericope, diktat of Corellia, killed any illusions Obi-Wan had left that this madness might end with a radically reformed Republic. In that regard, I can't speak for the Chancellor or Mandalore. However, I am reasonably sure they will be open for a deal if this is what you want for your support, Obi-Wan admitted. If anything, he was confident that Satine and Vale would feel relieved by this particular turn of events. We can offer naval elements for Mandalore's liberation, in exchange for the pledge that Duro will be the next major core world liberated. We can also offer logistics support for reconnaissance and a relief operation in preparation for the liberation of Mandalore, the CEO bargained. We are certain that Vale won't jump in blind in what everyone believes to be a trap. Obi-Wan could only agree that this was a very generous offer. Then again, they were talking about Vale. He might be safer to be around when busy rebuilding Mandalore instead of being out for blood after everyone who could betray him and his people. =RK=, Part 4. =RK=. When writing this book, we had to think long and hard about how much time we should dedicate to this segment. As far as dirty little secrets go, these aren't particularly little, and they were never particularly secret in the first place. If anything, a quick search on the Holonet would give you a lot of context and tons of propaganda about them. The rise of the Mid-Rim Alliance in general and that of the Mandalorian Freehold in particular and how they shaped the galaxy are worth their own dedicated book, perhaps multiple books, considering all the controversies, propaganda, lies, and deceptions involved. Instead of covering everything that is easy to find in depth, we will focus on various obscure facts, secrets, and theories. Enter Severance Tan, a Chiss Confederate commander and close associate of Count Dooku. She was also the template used to create the clone Arya Astra, better known as Mandalore's Sith apprentice. The chaos of the war and still classified information led to many controversies surrounding those names and their implications. General Tan was Count Dooku's personal agent during the war until the successful coup within the Sith that removed him from power. Officially, her last assignment was investigating corruption and treason within the Confederacy aimed at escalating the war. General Tan and her team were allegedly doing precisely that until the coup ousted Dooku from power. In its aftermath, she defected, though that didn't become widely known or useful until the operation to liberate Mandalore. This is the point where facts and conspiracy theories begin to blur. Dirty Secrets of the Clone Wars. New Corellian Publishing House. to the best of my knowledge, neither Count Dooku nor any relevant member of the Confederate leadership at the time wanted the war to escalate as it did. No official orders authorized the release of the Blue Shadow on Naboo or its use on Coruscant as an area denial weapon against military bases. Count Dooku was in Jedi custody, and the raid on Coruscant aimed to liberate him first and hurt the Jedi second, not escalating the war by releasing Blue Shadow. That mess with the Senate and the mercenaries that took it was supposed to be nothing but a distraction that succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. Investigating the particulars of these incidents, among others, were my final orders from Count Dooku after he escaped Jedi custody during the raid. From the debriefing of General Severance Tan. A particularly virulent conspiracy theory focuses on Count Dooku's relationship with the Jedi Order and the dual coups within the Cis and the Republic, which are dark mirrors of each other. In the former case, the coup was both successful and aimed at removing a former Jedi from power. In the latter case, it was an attempt by the Jedi to seize power. The core of this particular theory is that elements within the Jedi Order orchestrated the war. They guided the Separatists through Count Dooku on the Confederate side. The Jedi had a significant influence on Coruscant, more than enough to elect them as generals of the Grand Army of the Republic, putting Jedi in command of both sides' military efforts. It wasn't until their man Dooku was ousted from power that the Jedi contemplated, planned, and launched their coup to seize the Republic before the truth of their involvement could come out. From the Great Conspiracies of the Clone Wars, by Junji Kelso. =RK=, Flag Bridge, Victory, General Vale's flagship, high orbit above Kashyyyk, glimmering holograms cast shadows throughout a darkened compartment. Simulation after simulation rapidly unfolded in the main holotank, while the results of past ones hung in a series of ever-expanding windows hanging in the air. Some tactical problems Victoria wargamed quickly had very generous estimates of the enemy trap awaiting us at Mandalore. Those were the only ones allowing for a semblance of victory with the forces I might have available. All the realistic simulations, taking into account the presence of at least a sector fleet equivalent waiting to ambush us on top of the forces blocking Mandalore, ended poorly. Battle meditation could go only so far when utilized against a droid-controlled and crewed fleet. Anyway, utilizing that technique was going to be mandatory because I was sure there would be no time to forge whatever ships I might be able to gather in a proper fleet. Mandalore was bait, and the enemy couldn't afford to dangle it for much longer after Starhammer. In some regards, it was a miracle the place hadn't fallen yet. The more likely reason was that the Confederacy made sure they didn't take Mandalore so it could serve as an effective bait for longer. This is realistic simulation 123, Vicky's voice broke the silence. In the main holotank, 100 capital ships with tattered escorts fought through the Confederate blockade above Mandalore. The Liberation Force took position above the mountain range, holding the primary shield generators, keeping the enemy from slagging the planet, ready to deploy reinforcements when a separatist armada jumped out of hyperspace, ensuring there would be no escape. My fleet lasted long enough to deploy ground forces and cover holes opening in the shields to allow them through. After that, the enemy kept throwing everything it had at us, ensuring we were trapped on Mandalore and eventually ground down until they could compromise the shields. After that, the fleet in orbit opened fire, solving everyone's Mandalorian and Sith problems. If the enemy is no longer content to use Mandalore as bait, I estimate the odds of protecting the shields without at least parity in orbit as remote, Vicky concluded. Her avatar lit up the space to my right, and she tilted her head to the side and looked at me. There won't be meaningful reinforcements if you end up cut off on Mandalore with the Confederacy doing its best to kill you, she frowned. That's my understanding of the political situation crippling us. Most of our allies in the core are unable, or pointedly unwilling to commit forces to liberate Mandalore with me out here, being dangerous. If there is a realistic chance for me to get myself killed after stranding myself on Mandalore, our esteemed allies will do their best to ensure there will be no reinforcements coming to break the enemy blockade before Mandalore burns to ash and I am very dead, I confirmed. With allies like these, who needs enemies? It was almost nostalgic. At least my enemies back in the Sith Empire were usually open about wanting me dead. I cannot calculate a winning strategy. We need more forces or more time. Vicky's gaze flickered toward the holotank. A campaign of hit-and-run attacks meant to slowly destroy the enemy's numerical advantage was the only conventional strategy that might work with the forces I believed I could gather anytime soon. It could also fail spectacularly if the enemy manages to jump reinforcements on top of us, no matter what precautions we took. More importantly, there was no guarantee we would get replacement for any damaged or destroyed ships during such a campaign. As if that wasn't bad enough, I simply didn't have time for such a protracted campaign. All the enemy needed to do to foil such a strategy was to press their advantage on the ground harder. The moment they took out the shields, I would have to either charge at them in a desperate gambit to save Mandalore or run while it burns behind me. I waved a hand, using the gesture to more easily guide the force to manipulate the holotank controls. It flickered, showing a map of the galaxy displaying the strategic situation. It didn't help that all the excuses everyone was officially giving were real enough, though not necessarily as impactful as they made them sound. The core was back in Republic hands save for the region around Fondor. However, on the map, it glowed with malignant red symbols showing all the worlds with droid armies that needed to be purged the hard way. That by itself tied up a tremendous amount of shipping, complicating our logistics situation. Then there was the Mid-Rim Alliance. In the long run, its very existence was going to be a tremendous political boon. In the short to medium term, its survival meant that now we had access to the mines across a significant chunk of the galaxy. However, holding the logistics lines with the MRA open and shielding them with Trench and his fleets intact meant another large commitment of forces and virtually all remaining logistics vessels. Success there meant revitalizing the economy and ensuring long-term material advantage, so compromising the Alliance's survival was out of the question no matter what some of our allies in the core wanted. Consequently, there were no ships to spare outside of system defense forces, and no one would release them for my benefit. If anything, those ships would not be released for any reason but an enemy offensive with catastrophic consequences to ensure enough vessels wouldn't be available to aid me in liberating Mandalore. It didn't help that this state of affairs was partially my fault because I used such SDF forces during my latest offensive. Releasing ships to liberate Mandalore meant liberating another core world, later, perhaps much later, which was unacceptable to our allies in the core with the ships to spare. Especially not for Mandalore or my sake. There's no conventional answer within grasp, I can see, I admitted. I wasn't going to rely on the enemy being incompetent and handing me a critical political and military victory when it was clear they'd been working on making Mandalore my grave for a long time now. The dark side settled heavily around me when I accepted this fact. When faced with a no-win scenario, you either do not play or change the rules of the game. In many regards, I was out of trump cards left to play. However, I was not alone. At that thought, Arya's spirit stirred in the back of my mind, where she had been quietly observing the simulations and taking mental notes. I pushed past my apprentice to my bond with Zash and pinged her. I could soon sense her distant awareness, irritation, and a hint of curiosity. With Arya and my former master, there were 3 of us. Between us, we might just have the raw power and endurance for another mass use of battle meditation and something deadlier at Mandalore. Vicky, establish a secure channel with Coruscant. I need to speak with Zash and Satine.